If there was a tiger that had been starved for a week, and then your family and this tiger happens to meet, and the tiger happens to kill a member of your family and eats it, can you really blame the animal?
Kind of.
Basically, we thought that the amount of sell pressure that was coming in was probably a couple of large funds, or maybe somebody like Celsius that wanted to get out of USD exposure because they had to wind down leverage or something like that. So we weren't particularly concerned. But then what we started to notice across the order books was like the pace by which UST was being sold off was accelerating. So I think there was like a 10-minute period where we saw like $400 million worth of market sells happening all at once. So then that's when we decided that we needed to deploy LFG reserves to defend the peg. And this wasn't the original plan, by the way. What we originally wanted to do with LFG was to put that Bitcoin into a smart contract and then allow users to redeem Bitcoin against UST in a decentralized manner, similar to how users can redeem and mint UST against Luna. But that system was still under development, and it would take too long to bring that system up while this crisis was still happening. So we decided to deploy LFG reserves.
As they're deployed, though, since it couldn't be the system that you wanted it to be, talk to me about kind of what the discussions are in the war room at that time around, okay, this is what we should do, this is where we should send it, this is how it's going to be done.
So the idea was that we would give that Bitcoin to a market maker so that they can buy UST with it, and then that's what we did. But what we after some time, what we started to hear from the market maker was that the Bitcoin was being spent too quickly, because the amount of sells for UST had only started to accelerate, and we started to see shorts pile up massively against Luna and UST at some given point in time.
If there is one there that could be proven, though, I guess the one that people focus in on is where the billions of dollars from LFG goes in terms of the market maker, and whether or not that could also just let some big whale offload UST and exit that way. Because there's, as you said, it was designed to be something that would be much more transparent and wasn't ready for that. So what can you kind of provide there that would say, no, look, this was all handled above board?
Well, so I think what most people don't understand is, given that most people that are observing this situation have never worked with a market maker or a trading firm. So they assume that if you pay somebody something, it's going to go to Curve or something of that nature, or be converted to WBTC, and then just trade on the on-chain DEX, and everything can be summed up in just a few transactions. But it's not generally how these large trading firms work. It's just that they have balances in very large sizes across multiple different exchanges and custodians. So generally what they would do is that they would take payment for a transaction, and they would book it, and they would generally move that to a custodian or something, and they would have existing balances that could kick off trades right away as soon as the settlement has been made. So I don't have visibility into where they put the Bitcoin after LFG settled to the market maker, but just in terms of how much UST they were able to buy back, it matches the amount of Bitcoin that we gave them. And in terms of doing OTC trades to cash out whales, A, I don't think they would have done that, and B, even if they were to do something like that, if these whales weren't able to OTC, they would sell anyway, right? So unless they wanted to lose money, the market maker would do these OTC trades at fair price, at whatever the effective price of UST happened to be at that given point in time. So I don't see what the problem is.
There's a couple other I could run through if you really wanted to just let them rip.
Of course, yeah.
One of them is Flex Corp, around kind of some of the design of Terraform Labs and the way it's set up, and kind of looking into kind of where money moves in the hierarchy, because again, there's a lot that's handled on-chain and a lot that's not.
Right.
Why have that over there, and what's kind of the relationship?
So in Korea, we used to have three entities that were subsidiary of TFL. So we had Terraform Labs Korea, and then we had this company called Gaza Labs, and then the last is this company called Flexi Corporation. So in terms of Gaza and Terraform Labs, so Terraform Labs was like the company where I was working, and then when I moved out of Korea to Singapore, we wound that entity down, and then the remaining employees in Korea, they spun off into a company called Kernel. And what they had been planning to spend most of their time on is to build apps for large Web3, AAA gaming studios that wanted to build games. And the idea was that they would bring a lot of those games on Terra, and then they would get revenue by capturing some percentage of tokens or equity out of the companies that they were helping. And their revenue projections were really good. So as like a standalone business, I think this was really solid. And I think the people that were gonna do Kernel were very excited about it. Yeah. But I think the landscape is a little bit different, but I am sure they'll figure it out.
The other ones out there that people point to is Project Dawn, and the way that money was used. It's like 100 million a month.
Oh, so I mean, just to be clear, like one thing that people are confused about Project Dawn is that we initially made like a large withdrawal to be able to fund Dawn.
Yeah.
And then we just noted that in addition to Dawn, every month we'll be at max limiting the emission of Luna tokens to 3 million per month. So that's independent of Project Dawn. And those 3 million were used to meet our obligations to investors and employee vesting. And once again, none of that to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All or operational costs,
yes.
essentially, to
yes.
keep everything going.
Yes.
3 million Luna.
Yes.
Which seems high.
But then again, like if somebody bought these tokens or they like agreed to work for the company, then it's kind of like as if like these tokens represent their equity upside,
yeah.
right? And you can't renegotiate those. I mean, you can't fire an employee just because they agreed to take on a lot of risk when things weren't going well, and then suddenly like you feel like that upside, which is the risk that they took, is suddenly doing well. Neither can you renege on like an investment contract that you've made.
And going back to kind of what Terraform Labs now has at its disposal. In building Luna 2.0 and trying to salvage some of this, the transparency around that, what kind of standing is Do Kwon, Terraform Labs, sitting on now to, as you say, come up again from the ashes?
So in terms of the future of Terra 2.0, the blockchain, like one of the things that I'm banking on is a lot of the core of the community that was built up during the crash. So a lot of people think about Terra as just having been built up over Anchor, but actually like Anchor was very large, yes, but even if you take away Anchor, the Terra ecosystem still had $6-7 billion in TVL, which would still make it the second or the third largest blockchain in terms of TVL across applications like Astroport, which was the largest DEX. And at peak, Astroport had more trading volume than Curve and almost as much liquidity. And then, Mirror at peak like got to above like $2 billion, and there was like a host of different, like a rich ecosystem of different projects that were being built on the Terra ecosystem. So I think the core of that community still lives on, and I think they are primed to launch interesting things on top of Terra 2.0, independent of the things that we do. But like in terms of where I want to be spending my time is I'm always going to be doing things on Terra and for the Terra community. This is my home, and this is, where I feel like there's the brightest future. And most of Terraform Labs is still intact. So we lost a lot of, executives during the crash. But in terms of like the overall headcount, we lost a total of 2 devs. So a lot of the product talent that we've built up over time, and we've created a lot of products that are honestly, I think at the cutting edge of user experience in Web3 and DeFi. Like let's say the Terra Station wallet. I think the Anchor experience and the product market fit obviously was pretty strong. Mirror and lots of projects that we've incubated like Pylon and Valkyrie. So that is being repurposed to rebuild the Terra economy. So if our previous slogan was a decentralized economy needs decentralized money, my thinking has shifted a little bit. I think in some sense, like decentralized money needs a decentralized economy just as much. So I think the issue of what happened here was that the underlying economies were not very mature. So essentially what we're going to try to do is to build various different types of apps whereby we draw in more human activity from the offline world to the internet as much as possible using the best of Web3 technologies that we know, and make sure that Terra is the home to as many of those killer applications as possible. One thing that people just generally don't understand about Web3 is that they see hundreds of different apps and then they think that usership is like uniformly distributed across these things. But actually, like if you look at how Ethereum block space was being spent, prior to the crash, I think OpenSea was maybe 25, 30% of all gas fees being spent, NFT mints another 20%, and maybe just general token transfers and DeFi, the remaining percentage. So it's definitely a very top-heavy business where you just need to create a number of apps that people love to use, and then people will start to call that blockchain their own.
As you look to build out Terra 2.0, though, I mean, how much of the trust that may have been lost in the DPEG and meltdown crash spills over into that ecosystem? And what needs to be done to really restore? Do you feel like you've done enough?
I think it's going to take time. But I think, I think one aspect of Terra 1.0 that probably wasn't as healthy was there was a lot of trust in like one person, right? Which is me. And I don't think that's like representative of what actually happened. If you look at like the amount of talent that was working out of TFL, even though they didn't particularly like to shitpost on Twitter very much, is very large. And we've had some great engineers, product managers, that were setting the tone for a lot of the projects that we were pushing out. And I think in reality, where people gave me a lot of credit for in terms of building up an ecosystem, I happen to be the most public facing figure. But that's not to say that there weren't other great builders, a lot of great leaders in this ecosystem that have stepped up to get Terra to where it was before the DPEG. So I think, like what I'm going to try to do is to, make sure that people understand what happened here. And I think in terms of, healing wounds, the best that I can do is to just be upfront with, everything that happened and, just admit that I was wrong, right? So I believe that this can work. It didn't. And, provide my experiences and the things that I've seen for other entrepreneurs that might want to pick up where we left off.
Yeah.
And then in terms of where I spend my time, I'm just going to try to focus on building products that people love to use. And if they love using it, they will. If they don't, they won't.
What about, I guess, in terms of the legacy, it's you move on from this, you build something else. And if it's Luna 2.0, that's one thing. But the legacy of everyone else in what they lost in this still continues.
Right.
So how do you square that in terms of, can you move on if other people out there are still reeling from their own personal losses?
It's a tough question. It's not easy. Especially because there's also a time series to this as well, right? Like you could need that money right away to be able to do things for your family, and a crash like this just makes it impossible to do that. So I just don't have an answer there.
Luna Foundation Guard still has 200 million?
I think it's like 311 Bitcoin, and then like a large chunk of AVAX. So Avalanche wasn't touched during the DPEG events, and then it has some.
Is that because there's a token lockup?
No, there's no token lockup. It just, like if you tried to sell an altcoin, what when Bitcoin is crashing, it just wouldn't have worked.
Pressures the price.
Right.
But when it comes to the last update on using that to make people whole, that was the last update I saw from LFG.
Yeah, so what we plan to do is basically do a program whereby in the first week, everybody that held up to, let's say, X thousand amount of UST can claim against this LFG reserve. And then week 2, that amount goes up. Week 3, that amount goes up again. And what we've been spending time doing is working with centralized exchanges to index the amount of users and their holdings in each bracket. Now, some of these exchanges have been rather slow in getting that data to us. And in some cases, like the data that they've provided was inflated over what was visible on chain. So we've been working with, the various different partners that have, worked with UST to make sure that the data that they provided to us is accurate. It's proving to take some time. Yeah. But once that process is over, we're going to liquidate all of LFG's holdings and then, begin the process of making small holders get their airdrops.
You're a smart guy, and you know stablecoins probably better than everyone in the world, I think. And you knew the risk around depegging. When it comes to those risks now, though, it's like you're making those decisions in your seat. I don't know if in your head you're thinking about what could happen to me as a person if this fails.
I literally didn't think about that even for 1 second. I've never thought about what could happen to me if this fails.
Really?
Not even once.
Why not?
Because I didn't think that this would fail.
But it's not even in the back of your mind, like, what do I do if this fails?
Not even once.
Have you failed before?
Not really.
In life?
Well, not much. I mean, I've had like a startup that I gave up on, but that was like mainly because I got more interested in crypto, and and this is sort of like the first major thing that I've done in my career. And before that, I had never failed before.
When people try and connect the dots between Basis Cash and what happened with Terra, and you talk about that wasn't me, that was a failed project. Some people could look at that and say, that's kind of setting up to make Terra look better than Basis Cash.
So to give some context on Basis Cash, we acquired a young team that was working on a staking derivatives protocol on Cosmos. And one of the people that we acquired out of this team happened to be very brilliant. So we initially staffed this entire 5 or 6 person team to work on the anchor side of things. Now, like one of these 5 happened to be very brilliant and contribute significant amount of work to the anchor protocol. But in terms of the other 5, they lost interest pretty quickly, and then they started to not want to do work. So I started to ask them, what are the things that you were interested in doing? And one day, like one of the, the 5 guys or so that weren't interested in working on Anchor, so he comes up to me and says, hey, Do, you should really look at like this, DeFi yield farms that are going on Ethereum. And he said he had a good idea for launching something that is actually pretty adjacent to what Terra had already been doing for a year, but tapping into the larger community of Ethereum.
Yeah.
Right. So, and that idea was Basis Cash. So this group, banded together and then created like a pretty cyberpunk, look and feel type of website based on the defunct product Basis. So Basis was a stablecoin that raised $133 million, predicated on building a 3-token system to create an algorithmic stablecoin. So as a brief refresher, the way that it worked was that there was a stablecoin called Basis Cash. There was a bond token to absorb contractions called Basis Bonds. And then the last is something that would benefit from expansions called Basis Shares. So my biggest objection to the Basis system, is distinct from Terra, is that the model doesn't really make sense because hold on.
Model doesn't make sense, so it's distinct from what Terra was.
Well, I mean, so back at that time, I felt like it uniquely didn't make sense because you had an asset that was supposed to absorb contractions, but upside is limited, right? So when contractions are happening, there's very limited reasons to buy it because, like such is the nature of these things. Yeah. Whereas you have an asset that if you got into like an early pre-sale or something like that, there's almost no downside, right? Because if it's something that just benefits from expansions and it doesn't really have any, responsibility to absorb contractions like that, then in that case, like the amount of stake that people are willing to put up during contractions is limited.
Yeah.
It also divides the main stakeholders in the ecosystem from people that actually take on the risk.
So you see this project and you say this doesn't really make sense per se, but let's see where it goes. And you join on as Rick Sanchez.
Right.
Because there's a team that was building it and they liked Rick and Morty.
Yeah, so the team that started to build Basis Cash, because like being Twitter anon was all the rage back then, and then they assigned themselves characters from the Rick and Morty universe. So I don't remember the exact mappings, but like their leader was this guy named DeFi Morty. But the issue was they couldn't really speak English all that well because they were based out of Korea and things like that. And then they asked me to see if I can, talk to some reporters or other community members initially, assuming the identity of Rick Sanchez, right?
Well, wouldn't it help more if you were speaking as Do Kwon?
Right, but then people would ask me like who the other people were.
Yeah. And
they didn't want to be doxxed.
Really?
Yeah. Well, they didn't want to be doxxed in a project that, they had some choice language for regulators that wanted to shut down Basis Cash when they were first doing the project. So if I was doing this in my own persona, I think that would have worked. And I actually, like using my main account, I was pretty active in the Basis Cash chat as well. But yeah, so I helped them with like the initial community building, talking on Telegram a little bit, talking in the voice of what Rick Sanchez would have sounded like. And then it was a fair launch, right? So they structured it as like something where like the vast majority of tokens would be given out in an initial farming event. And then there would be subsequent farming events, I think for, like either holding the stablecoin or some basis share tokens.
Yeah.
But
eventually, it gets built up, it works for a little bit, and then eventually depegs and fails.
Right.
And so when you're kind of like attached to the project and you talk about it like you're not attached to the project later on,
right,
kind of trying to sell UST, does that, what's kind of the thinking there in terms of, maybe not being like, yeah, I was attached to that project, I didn't invent it, but I was there and some things went wrong. We used the learnings from that and now we're building UST, which is better and won't fail the same way.
Well, so I think for Basis Cash, I think it was an interesting experiment. I think they were pretty upfront in the Discord and Telegrams about like, yeah, this thing can depeg. And I think a lot of the early algorithmic stablecoin efforts there and then like ESD, DSD, they were pretty upfront about those risks. Most people that were buying these algorithmic stablecoins were DeFi degens that are already made a lot of money in the Ethereum ecosystem. So they understood those risks. They participated because they thought it was interesting. A comparable project like ESD, it captured the imagination of, I think, most of the elites in Ethereum DeFi, most of the well-known founders in the ecosystem, actually. And then, so I think, like bringing the basis mechanism to light and testing it, especially in some sort of like almost a sandbox type of environment before DeFi became very large, was good. I think the basis share market cap far exceeded Luna's like right after they launched. So they said, all right, we're just gonna run this, and they quit the company and then they started to run it solo. But I think the choices that they made to sort of run basis cash and do various different things on top was, I mean, I think for a first effort, they did a lot of things right, but I think some things were, can be left to, there's room for room to be desired. So for example, like creating more aggressive farming events, like when the stablecoin demands start to dry up.
Yeah.
After positing it as a fair launch, giving devs explicit token grants from the token pool, and then a short while after that, just selling all the tokens and not doing any work. So those are the things that I am critical of because I never made those choices.
Yeah.
But
at the same time, though, you mentioned like who gets hurt when that depegs. It's mostly DeFi degens,
right,
as you said, who are kind of in basis cash.
Right.
When you think about who might have been making these decisions and the risk profiles of degens in crypto versus someone who comes along and sees a stable coin earn 20%, maybe sees it through a Gemini earn 20%, those kinds of things attracts a very different crowd.
Yeah.
So when you think about like retail people who are new to crypto, maybe don't even know the risks, if there's a distinction there in terms of who gets hurt when Terra fails, it's no longer someone who's a degen trying to.
Oh, absolutely.
But it's someone who's trying to invest in a savings protocol,
right,
and it sounds like a savings account.
Right.
Have you thought about that as?
Yeah. So an algorithmic stablecoin, actually, a stablecoin is a very interesting beast, right? Because if you invest into a layer 1 token, for instance, the risk doesn't really dissipate over time. So, for example, I guess it gets de-risked over scale like any other thing.
Lindy effect.
Right. But psychologically, people understand that you can invest into like an Apple, for instance, and it could lose value overnight. Like the same thing happened with like, let's say Nokia, or if you look at like the printer companies, they're dying a slow bleeding death over multiple years, right? But I think for a stablecoin, it's supposed to be a currency, right? So as it starts to build up scale, I think the types of people that get exposed to using a currency becomes less and less sophisticated.
Yeah.
So in the beginning, like when you launch an algo stablecoin for the first time, then I don't think anybody blames like the Iron Finance team, for instance, for getting into that game, because it crashed in 2 weeks. And if you are investing into something that new, that novel, then like the fact that you need to take on the risk is implicit, right? Same for ESD, DSD. So I think when those projects like depegged and met their doom, I don't think people blame the team very much because they knew what they were getting into.
Yeah.
I think sort of the pain, like the additional pain of UST was that it was supposed to be a currency, right? So, and as currencies get larger and larger, like the number of impacted people, the pain, and the lack of understanding of how currencies work, like also increases as well. So, for example, when there were FX crises that depegged Asian currencies massively against the US dollar, that pain was absorbed by everyone. But I don't think most people understood why that was happening. Mm-hmm. A lot of people just said that's bad economy. So, for example, throughout like the IMF crisis of '98, or let's say I remember in 2008, 2009, the KRW exchange rate against the dollar almost went up to 2,000. Mm-hmm. So, which would make it doubly expensive to buy exports, right? But a lot of people didn't really understand that that was due to like the Korean won losing value. They just thought it was bad economy without understanding what that really means.
Yeah.
So I think that case is applicable to UST as well. The pain was absolutely larger because the way that a lot of users understood UST was that this is just like Tether, this is just like USDC.
Mm-hmm. So who takes on that blame then for not really explaining to retail, or is there no blame? Like, should you be blamed? Should Gemini, Binance, like, is there a need for retail, or is it just like, look, you knew the risks, or you should have known the risks?
I think I should have known the risks of UST much better. Like looking back in the position that I was in, I I didn't think that the risks that were being posited to UST were material. Every day as UST grew, I just saw it gaining in Lindy, gaining in popularity, gaining more integrations. And it just sort of became this thing that sort of inspired so much people in crypto generally, the idea of a decentralized stablecoin.
Yeah.
And I saw UST as that thing that was almost inevitable and was poised to become the money for all of crypto. So, in hindsight, I think we should have been more skeptical at the team instead of, thinking that everything that we do is simply going to work. I think it's a massive failure in terms of proper risk assessment.
This is the thing that I struggle with because, you just talked about the Asian financial crisis, which, if there was one area where maybe I was unsure if you knew everything about the risks, because we already talked about every algorithmic stablecoin failing before, there was the financial risk around what someone like a George Soros could do to take down any financial peg. To your point, not just in crypto, but in traditional finance as well, when you're dealing with financial currencies. And that was one of the things that was raised and you retweeted and talked about as, this isn't possible. And so when you say there was a 0% chance, or at least a very small chance of failure, what about Terra, in your mind, made it untouchable around any of those risks of failure?
So, I'm straight up, it's not rational, right? So when you think about the risks that are, possible with any currency, let alone Terra, any currency can fail, right? I think right now, if the situation gets any worse, we might even see a collapse of the Eurozone and the Japanese yen, right? So even currencies at that scale, the third largest economy in the world, the largest economic collective in the world, their currencies could fail, rationally speaking. I guess the only thing that sort of tipped the balance of my thinking into thinking that UST would not fail was because, number one, I thought we were living in the golden age of Web3, and I think we still are, where you're seeing an explosion of growth of decentralized technologies. And number two, the way that we would program things on top of these digital currencies would be a lot better managed from a risk perspective and a lot more transparent. Thereby, I felt like a lot of the risks that are manifest in central banking planning policies would not be applicable to UST. Both of those things were wrong.
I do think, that was one thing that stood out yesterday when we were talking. You actually kind of seemed all right with it. In terms of, you're not trying to prove a conspiracy here, but someone attacking the community. All they have to gain is a short-term monetary upside of, I don't know, depends on what they did to attack this and how much money they made. But if someone did do that, think about all the pain it costs.
In every trade, there's collateral damage, right? So for example, if you're buying a token, then somebody that put out a short gets hurt. And this could be retail, right? A lot of people take out leverage shorts because they learned margin trading for the first time looking at, let's say FTX Academy or something, and then they figure out how to do it. And then when you sell a token, that loss is socialized amongst the rest of the holders. So if you start to get emotional and assign blame for how trades are executed in what is supposed to be a credible, neutral, and transparent market, then I'm not very bullish on the future of crypto if that's the case. So the reason why I don't blame short sellers and I don't try to find out who sold or what the motivations might be or things like that is because there's no blame to assign, right? If you see a market opportunity, a trader's job is to be rational about it, erase emotion, and take it. So if the peg broke, then you can't blame the trader that took a market opportunity.
Maybe from an objective standpoint, but from where you sit as a subjective standpoint, if someone came into my house and did something to my family, that's the way I would see it.
Right, but let me tell you this. if there was a tiger that had been starved for a week, and then your family and this tiger happens to meet, and the tiger happens to kill a member of your family and eats it, can you really blame the animal?
Kind of.
So if I went down that route and then spent, you know, months, years collecting evidence and, you know, meeting investigators and talking to press and things like that, you know, it's just going to be so much harder for me to do anything else. And logically, I do genuinely agree in that, like, you cannot be emotional about markets, right? You can't blame people for shorting. You can't call people idiots for longing, right? People just make those trades, markets are dispassionate, and they move the way that they will. So I think your point about if I let myself, you know, think in that direction, I just, you know, would be like a shell of a man for several years, right? But I do intend to do really interesting work.
But I mean, to your tiger metaphor, right? When you're talking about that, it's like, all right, do you blame a tiger for coming in and eating one of my family members? It's like in this, it's someone saw the 4-pool migration, waited for the perfect time. It was calculated. It wasn't just an emotional, I need to eat. It was, this is the time to strike and take this thing down. And if that's the case, you know, it's a little bit more calculated.
Yeah, so if you're asking me whether there was a mole at TFL, that's probably yes. Whether somebody tried to take advantage of that particular opportunity, I would say that the answer is yes. But if those opportunities existed, then the blame is on the person that presented those vulnerabilities in the first place.
Who is that?
That's me. Like, we did the 4-pool migration, right? So I alone am responsible for any weaknesses that could have been presented for a short seller to start to take profit.
When you think about a mole at TFL, is that because they knew when the migration would happen, they knew when the weak point would be, or they knew all of the things that could have gone wrong?
Well, so the attack happened with the 4-pool migration plans, and the only people that knew that were TFL employees. The event happened precisely at the moment when our entire leadership were on flights trying to get to Singapore for like a quarterly summit. So thereby like incapacitated from any, you know, responses either on social media or anything of that kind. So, you know, there was probably some information flows that we're not aware of to this day.
So this was an extremely calculated move.
I'm just saying that there's coincidences, and I'm trying really hard not to go down this rabbit hole because I don't want to let myself.
But why don't you want to let yourself go down that hole? Because, again, if it were me, there's someone who did this. And there's an aspect of, I don't want to say revenge, but there's an aspect of trying to figure it out that would be really hard to turn off.
But what good would that do, right? Like, let's say that we found like a dark network of like hedge funds that had tried to take down Terra and Luna. Like, what could that do? Would we sue them for billions of dollars and try to use that money to make USD holders whole?
Maybe not. But I think about kind of the way that you responded to some of those tweets about how this could be done. You said, billionaires in my network, test me and try, find out.
That was a little different though, because what Freddie's analysis was saying was you could acquire a lot of UST from open markets because like the swap spread impacts more on the way down rather than on the way up. Mm-hmm. But there's actually symmetry in both directions. So the cost of staging an attack is identical to as when you are acquiring your UST stake versus divesting. Now, like if that analysis had concluded like the timing of LFG, like trying to build reserves to, let's say to build like Bitcoin reserves and things like that, that would have been a totally different dynamic. Yeah. But those things hadn't existed at that point.
I almost wonder if, it sounds like there's a route to go down. If you open that box and you find out the answer to who was behind it. And I guess it's fair to ask and make sure that it wasn't you.
Are you asking whether I shorted?
Yeah.
I've never shorted a cryptocurrency in my life, let alone Luna and UST.
And there's no upside for you to see
There's
this.
zero. There's zero upside for me to do any such thing.
So when it comes to figuring out who was behind this, then I feel like as a founder, if you're saying that you don't want to go down that path because it would mean ultimately that it would prove you failed to protect against that, is that the main reason why?
No, it's not so much that. It's just that, like, even if you found somebody that has shorted, you know, like Luna and UST, or like accumulated UST with the purpose of depegging it, I don't think that's legal. How I deal with stress is that I only care about things that matter and I can do something about. So this seems to be squarely in the realm of something that would give me personal emotional closure, but that would be a selfish thing to do because even if I knew, there's nothing that can be done, right? So I choose to spend my time, you know, not blaming other people, but instead focusing on what we can do next with the resources that are available with like the insights and the talent that we've accumulated over the years. And that's what gives me closure.
At the same time, though, I guess, if it sounds like you're putting all these things together, the fact that it happened when everyone was on a plane, and the fact that when you landed, like, this stuff did seem calculated to the only thing that anyone knew about the timing of the 3-pool to 4-pool migration was internal to Terraform Labs, which means they're an employee of yours. Somebody, by that, connecting the dots, somebody you know stabbed you in the back.
Yeah.
If someone stabbed you in the back, how would you not want to know?
Zach, from that question, I can see that you've never been stabbed in the back before.
I have been stabbed in the back before.
Right.
And I made every single effort to look that person in the eye and say, you should know you fucked up.
Right. I think after a while, you kind of learn to let it go, especially when Terra was at the peak. It was, you know, it just became very political. And like once you start to become personally, emotionally invested in like all sorts of things that are happening from business side, then it's just very difficult to lead life, right? So yes, there was an internal mole. He was sharing screenshots of various different things. Probably precedes the DPEG, been leaking things to the press and things like that. But
that was something you knew about.
I mean, leaking to the details to the press is one thing because, I mean, these are like about like a round we're putting together. So we probably would have put out a press release anyway. So yeah, there were multiple people that had reporters that were friends and were telling the reporters. Sometimes I knew who they were.
Yeah.
But it didn't seem like something that you would, you know, fire somebody for.
That's also pretty important though, because you talk about if that were the case, you've already moved past the 3-pool to 4-pool migration. They've initiated the attack. You're now in defense mode. You're in a war room with people and you don't know who you can trust. You're putting together a round to save Terra at that point. And the details of the deal leak to press and it tanks the deal that would have saved.
Oh, so I don't think that came from like TFL. Like from some of the details that I've seen, I think it's from probably like the funds that were pitched. But like in terms of like the round being put together, that was a very tight group. So I don't think that was impacted. But in any case, like going back to like the backstabbing discussion, it's just business.
You don't take it personally.
I don't take it personally.
That is the one piece about this that I'm terrible at then, I guess. And maybe some people in the community also feel this way. Because there were equal opportunities for anyone who is long Terra or believed in the project to short it, right? If it's mid-DPEG mode and everyone's seen this before and says, look, you know, there's a chance for this to go to 0, and probably likely, especially after you tweet steady lads and there's a plan coming, the deal falls through, it's sitting there and there's a ripe opportunity when UST is at 60 cents to short the whole damn thing. The ability to short everything, even in that moment, I couldn't bring myself to do it. And you said it yourself as if it is a badge of honor. I never shorted Luna myself. Never shorted a cryptocurrency in my life.
Well, I mean, just because it's not, I don't consider that necessarily to be unethical. It's not something that I want to do. So I think about crypto communities as communities, right? So I think like the 3-3 move put up by Olympus doesn't really make that much sense from an economic perspective. But I think it's indicative of how crypto assets are a little bit more than simple financial assets. They're not like equities. They're not like commodities. But for a lot of these tokens that represent...
Why aren't they like equities and commodities? Is it because it signals more about who you are, what you believe in?
Because you're not supposed to be passive investors, right? Like every crypto community encourages and tries to galvanize its community to some higher moral calling, right? So the moral calling of the Terra community was to deliver the promise of decentralized money to as many places across the world as possible. And I think many people took up that mantle and decided to leave their jobs and create companies and do all sorts of things in service of a higher mission.
Or put their money into it.
Yes, but, yes, and of course, a lot of people are passive investors. But I think crypto is unique in the sense that it's converted more of its passive investor base into people, believers, into people that are actually can be called out to action to serve the community in more ways than capital. And I think that's what makes it strong.
But that's the thing that also I feel like would piss off anyone who believed in your mission and felt like they were a part of that mission. And you're saying that you don't have an emotional response to that. Which me, as some guy...
I did not say that I don't have an emotional response. I'm just saying that I've tried to make a calm-headed decision to categorize this as business and to move on to other things.
And the alternative if you don't?
Yeah, I mean, from a pure emotional standpoint, look at it from my standpoint. Like, it's the reason why I haven't shorted any cryptocurrency is not because I'm a bad trader, right? Like, of course I know how shorting works. Of course I know sometimes when there are opportunities. Like, everybody tells me things, right? Like I was like a top 10 project founder. Like I have information, but I don't trade those things, not because I don't know how to make money, but because I know that these things represent more than simple financial assets. That if I shorted a community or I acted on information that I have that other people don't, that there's other people on the other side of that trade that get hurt. Mm-hmm. Having said that, that doesn't mean that I should let my emotions guide, on like objective what other people do, right? So everybody's from different circumstances. They just make different decisions.
That's fair. If someone comes after me, if the tiger eats me, I can't blame the tiger.
Right.
If the tiger eats my family, I'm going to kill the tiger.
Have you heard the analogy of the market being a jungle?
Yeah, but it's people. Like you just said, it's people believing in certain things, and there's the downside beyond just numbers on a screen. It's people. Right? I mean, I guess at the same time, you could flip that and say, all right, you're building this thing up, you're sucking people's money in. It's like, it's just a jungle. Could be a way to look at it and say, it wasn't my fault. But you also believe that there was some blame that should be put on your shoulders. So it just seems kind of like looking at it as it's a jungle when someone attacks Terra, but also you're saying that some of this is your fault too. So that kind of seems inconsistent.
Interesting philosophical discussion. I think there's aspects to this where participants are humans. I think there's aspects to this where we're beasts. Interesting discussion.